Do you remember a moment when the ground seemed to vanish beneath your feet, not because of a mistake you made, but because someone decided you weren't enough? Picture this: a black woman, a respected CEO, arrives at the gate with her first-class ticket, every right to her seat. Yet instead of being welcomed, she is doubted, handcuffed, and shamed before strangers. Not for what she carried, but for the color of her skin. In that instant, a choice appears. Do you endure the humiliation in silence, or do you stand up, knowing the cost may be everything you've worked for? This story is not only hers, it belongs to anyone who has ever been told they didn't belong, and it asks each of us if it were you. What would you do tonight? You'll witness how one call, one act of courage, unraveled an empire, but more than that, you'll discover how dignity, once defended, can never again be denied. Stay with us, because this journey will move you, challenge you, and remind you of your own strength. Like, share, and subscribe so together we carry this story forward. The air inside JFK's Terminal 4 was heavy with the scent of coffee, floor polish, and the faint tang of jet fuel carried in by automatic sliding doors. It was just past 2:15 in the afternoon. Outside, a chill wind swept across Queens, 48 degrees on the big digital display that hung above the departures board. Nadia Brooks adjusted the strap of her leather carry-on and handed her passport to her son, Marcus, who trailed just behind her. He was 16, lanky, still growing into his long arms and legs. His hoodie hood was up, but his eyes scanned the terminal like he was recording every detail. He had inherited her sharp memory. They walked toward Gate B-22, where Kestrel Air's first-class boarding lane stood almost empty. Nadia had purchased 2 tickets, $14,800 each, non-stop from New York to San Francisco. It wasn't indulgence. She had a meeting scheduled with investors who were considering a $500 million expansion of her company. North Star logic. Missing that flight could mean months of lost ground. But the moment she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, the atmosphere shifted. Tricia Millstone, early 30s, dark hair tied tight, lips pressed in a practiced smile, studied the screen longer than necessary, her brows knit. She tilted her head, then looked back at Nadia as if something didn't add up. "This is your ticket?" Tricia asked, voice flat. Nadia nodded. "Yes, for me and my son." She kept her tone calm, as she always did when walking into boardrooms where everyone expected her to prove she belonged. Tricia held the boarding pass between 2 fingers like it might burn her. "These are first-class seats. That's correct." A pause. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. A couple of passengers in the economy line leaned to watch. Tricia glanced at her computer again. "Do you have the card you used to purchase them?" Nadia reached into her wallet, produced the platinum card, and set it on the counter. The gate agent barely looked at it before pursing her lips again. "I'm going to need a supervisor," Tricia said. She pressed a button under the desk. Nadia inhaled slowly. She had faced this before. Hotel clerks asking for extra ID, security personnel randomly selecting her bag, but here, in front of her son, in front of strangers, the sting felt sharper. Owen Hale arrived, wearing a navy jacket with supervisor embroidered above the pocket. He listened as Tricia whispered quickly, eyes darting toward Nadia. Then he turned to her. "Ma'am, we're going to need to run some additional verification. Could you step aside?" "Please," Marcus spoke before Nadia could answer. "Why she showed you the card. We're gonna miss the flight." Owen ignored him. "Just step over here." "Ma'am." Nadia kept her voice even. "Is there a specific reason my purchase requires extra verification?" Owen's jaw tightened. "Please don't make this more difficult." That phrase, "don't make this difficult," as if she was already the problem. Passengers were watching now. One lifted a phone, recording. Another whispered loudly enough for Nadia to hear, "Guess she doesn't belong up front." Within minutes, 2 Port Authority officers arrived. Their uniforms were crisp, radios crackling. Tricia explained, pointing at Nadia. Words like suspicious transaction and possible fraud floated in the air. Nadia felt Marcus's hand clutch her arm. "Mom, what's happening?" She placed her other hand over his. "Steady. It's all right." But inside, fury and humiliation burned. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us," one officer said. "For what reason?" Nadia asked. "Just procedure." Procedure. That word, too. Owen gestured. "She's holding up boarding. We need to move her." Before she could protest again, cold steel cuffs clicked around her wrists. The officer pulled them snug. The phone cameras caught everything a black woman in a tailored Navy suit, founder of a multi-billion-dollar company, standing silent as strangers gasped. Marcus shouted, "She didn't do anything. She bought the ticket, son. Calm down." Another officer ordered. Elaine Brooks, Nadia's 68-year-old mother, arrived at that moment, breathless from the walk down the concourse. She had insisted on accompanying them to the gate, even if she wasn't flying. When she saw the cuffs, her face crumpled. "Not again," Elaine whispered. "Not to my daughter." Passengers murmured, some outraged, others smirking. The cameras kept rolling. Nadia lifted her chin, refusing to bow. Her wrists ached, but she steadied her voice. "Marcus, stay calm. Grandma's here." The officers began to lead her away. The terminal buzzed. A mix of disbelief and quiet approval from those who thought justice was being done. As she walked, Nadia replayed every detail in her mind: the glance from Tricia, the quick whisper to Owen, the instant decision to call security. She thought about how many times her mother had been humiliated in quieter ways. Back in Newark in the 1970s, when stores followed them through aisles. Now it was happening again. Different setting, same suspicion. At the end of the concourse, as the officers guided her toward the holding area, a passenger's voice cut through the noise. "Hey, she showed you the card. Why are you treating her like this?" Others joined in. Phones lifted higher. Hashtags were already forming in the digital ether. Within minutes, millions would see a black CEO handcuffed for daring to sit in a seat she had paid for. Nadia walked steadily, her heart pounding, her mind already racing. Rage pressed against her chest, but beneath it, something colder took shape. This was bigger than her, bigger than humiliation. Something inside whispered, "Don't just endure this, use it." The holding room was colder than the concourse. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow across walls painted in government beige. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, as if even the scent of humanity had been scrubbed away. Nadia sat in a molded plastic chair, her wrists raw from the cuffs that had been removed only minutes earlier. Marcus was allowed in, though only after raising his voice until the officers relented. Now he sat beside her, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. He had never seen his mother restrained before. He had never seen her treated as if she were a criminal. For long minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence pressed down heavier than any question could. Outside the door, the muffled shuffle of shoes and static of radios filled the gaps. Finally, Marcus whispered, "Mom, why do they think you did something wrong?" She turned her face toward him. His eyes were wide, not just with fear, but with something she hated to recognize, doubt. Doubt in the fairness of the world. Doubt that success could shield you. Because sometimes people see what they expect to see, Nadia said softly, not what's real. He frowned. But you showed them the card. You had the ticket. I did. She agreed. Her voice held steady, but inside her chest anger throbbed like a drumbeat. That wasn't enough for them. The door opened. A Port Authority officer stepped inside, clipboard in hand. His nameplate read Sergeant Keller. He didn't sit. He stood with a kind of weary indifference, as if Nadia were just another file in his shift. "Ms. Brooks," he said, eyes skimming the page rather than meeting hers. "We're reviewing some inconsistencies with your purchase." Nadia leaned forward. What inconsistencies? Keller cleared his throat. "Large amount, unusual timing, certain risk flags. I run a company that builds the system you used to flag me," she replied, the steel creeping into her voice. "North Star Logic designed the very software your airline depends on. If anyone should understand how clean my record is, it's Kestrel Air." Keller finally looked at her, blinking, uncertain. Be that as it may, procedures are in place. Procedure. That word again. She tasted the bitterness of it. Elaine entered then, escorted by another officer who seemed reluctant to allow her inside. Her silver hair was pulled into a bun, strands loose from the hurried walk. She sank into the chair beside Marcus, placing a trembling hand on her daughter's arm. "I saw them take you," Elaine said. Her voice cracked, but she steadied it quickly. "I thought I'd buried this kind of thing decades ago. Newark, 1978. I was dragged out of a grocery store because they thought I'd stolen milk. I had the receipt in my pocket." Her words pierced the room. Marcus looked between his mother and grandmother, disbelief tightening his face. "Grandma, that happened to you too." Elaine nodded slowly. "It keeps happening. Just changes shape." Nadia closed her eyes for a moment, drawing on her mother's calm. She needed to be steady. She couldn't let Marcus see her unravel. "Sergeant Keller," she said evenly, "what exactly is your next step?" Keller shifted, uncomfortable. "We're waiting for confirmation from the airline. If everything checks out, you'll be released. How long? Could be an hour, maybe more. An hour." The investors in San Francisco expected her by evening. Every delay narrowed the window. Every minute here meant ground lost in battles she had fought for years. Marcus spoke up again. "She didn't do anything. You're just keeping her here because you can." "Son," Keller began, "we're following policy." "Your policy is broken," Marcus snapped, his voice cracked with teenage fury. Nadia touched his arm. "Marcus," she met his eyes, steadying him. "Anger without focus is wasted. Save it." The boy swallowed hard, then nodded. Silence filled the room again after Keller left. Elaine rubbed small circles on Nadia's back, the same gesture she had used when Nadia was a child struggling to breathe through winter asthma attacks. The comfort reached deeper than words. Inside, though, Nadia's mind was a storm. Images replayed Trisha's skeptical eyes, Owen's dismissive tone, the cold bite of the cuffs. Each memory scraped raw against her pride. She thought of the boardroom she was meant to be in tonight, the investors who doubted a black woman could lead $1 billion company until she proved it with numbers, quarter after quarter. And now, this humiliation in front of her son, in front of strangers, in front of 1,000 recording phones. What gnawed at her wasn't just anger. It was the knowledge that Marcus had witnessed it. The boy she raised to believe his future was wide open, now saw, firsthand, the narrow lens through which others judged them. Her thoughts slipped to an old conversation with her father. Long gone now. He had told her, sitting on their small porch in Newark, "They will test you. Every room you walk into, every chair you sit in, they'll test if you belong. You can't change their eyes. Nadia, but you can change what happens after. Change what happens after." She opened her eyes. "Mom," Marcus whispered, "yes, you're not going to let them get away with this, are you?" She looked at him, his shoulders squared despite the fear in his eyes. In that moment, she saw both the boy and the man he would become. "No," she said simply, "I won't." The door creaked open again. A younger officer poked his head in. "You're cleared to go." Airline verified the purchase. No apology. No acknowledgement of the mistake. Just release, like a file closed and shoved aside. Nadia stood, rolling her sore wrists. Marcus leapt up beside her. Elaine rose too, fire still burning in her eyes. As they walked out of the holding room, Nadia could feel dozens of gazes on her, passengers still waiting, officers lingering, employees whispering, phones still lifted. The story was already traveling faster than any plane could carry her. In the pit of her stomach, humiliation tangled with resolve. She had been through enough boardroom wars to recognize leverage when she saw it. And this was leverage she hadn't asked for, but now had in her hands. As they passed through the sliding glass doors back into the terminal, Marcus leaned close. "Mom, what are you going to do?" She didn't answer right away. The truth was still forming, heavy and sharp, but one thought crystallized, clear as the ringing of the departure announcements overhead. Use it. The ride back from JFK was quiet. Traffic along the Van Wyck crawled, horns bleating, trucks rumbling past, the city's heartbeat refusing to pause for anyone's humiliation. Nadia sat in the back seat beside Marcus, while Elaine leaned against the opposite window. Each of them carried silence differently. Marcus fiddled with his phone, swiping through social media feeds that were already ablaze with clips of his mother in handcuffs. Elaine prayed quietly under her breath, lips moving, a habit older than Nadia herself. And Nadia stared at the skyline, letting memory pull her backward in time. The glass and steel towers of Manhattan glimmered in the distance, but in her mind she saw the cracked sidewalks of Newark, the narrow row house where she grew up. The air back then was heavy with the smell of oil and fried food from the corner deli. Sirens wailed at night. Neighbors shouted across stoops and inside their small living room. Elaine sat at a worn wooden table with school books stacked high, urging her daughter to keep pushing. Nadia had been 12 when she first noticed how the world measured her. A teacher once praised her essay but added, "It's impressive for where you come from." She didn't understand fully then, but she carried that sting. At 15, she took her first coding class through a community program. The computer lab was dusty, the monitors humming like tired bees. But to Nadia, it was magic. She could type commands, and something would move, change, obey. It gave her a sense of control she rarely felt outside. Elaine worked 2 jobs, then a day shift teaching elementary school and a night shift tutoring. She came home bone-tired, hands smelling of chalk and coffee, yet she always asked about Nadia's progress. "Every line of code you write," Elaine told her, "is a key. One day you'll build doors nobody can shut on you." By 21, Nadia was accepted into MIT. She remembered arriving on campus with 1 suitcase, wearing shoes that pinched because they had been bought second-hand. Her classmates seemed confident, already fluent in the language of privilege. She felt like an intruder, but she learned to hide the doubt behind long nights in the lab. She wrote programs that mapped flight paths, fascinated by the way airplanes dance through crowded skies without colliding. Professors noticed her tenacity. When she graduated, she had offers from established tech firms, but she turned them down. Something in her wanted to build her own path, not fit into theirs. North Star Logic was born in a cramped Newark apartment. Servers stacked on folding tables, cables snaking across the floor. At first, it was just Nadia and 2 friends from MIT, coding until dawn, eating pizza that left grease stains on the keyboard. Investors ignored them, banks denied loans, but slowly they carved a reputation. Their algorithms for secure airport check-in caught the attention of small regional airlines, then bigger ones, then the Department of Transportation. Years later, North Star had grown into a company valued at billions. Their systems now handled passenger data for half the nation's major airports. Nadia became a fixture on magazine covers, praised as a visionary, but beneath the glossy profiles, she never forgot the struggle behind it. Each success was shadowed by memory. The landlord who assumed she'd pay rent late because she was young and black. The venture capitalist who asked if her company had a real CEO he could talk to. Now, sitting in traffic after humiliation at JFK, those memories sharpened. She realized how fragile belonging always felt. No matter the money, the influence, the achievements, it could all be dismissed by the suspicion in one gate agent's eyes. Marcus nudged her. "Mom, you okay?" She blinked and returned to the present. "Yes, sweetheart." "You don't look okay." "I'm remembering," she said quietly, "what everything it took to get here. Everything I promised myself I wouldn't let them take away." Elaine reached across the seat, resting her hand on Nadia's, "And they didn't," she said firmly. "Don't mistake this pain for defeat." Nadia exhaled, the words settling deep. Her mother was right. Pain didn't mean defeat. Pain could be direction. When they reached home in New Jersey, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple. The house was modest despite her wealth, a 2-story colonial with white siding and a garden Elaine tended faithfully. Nadia had never left it behind, not fully. It grounded her. Inside. Marcus dropped his bag by the stairs and disappeared to his room, no doubt still scrolling through the firestorm online. Elaine went to the kitchen, clattering pots for tea. Nadia walked to her study, where shelves of technical manuals stood beside framed photographs, her first MIT graduation photo. A snapshot of Marcus at age 5 holding a toy airplane, a picture of her father standing proud in a pressed suit. She lowered herself into the leather chair and pulled up her laptop. Already, emails were flooding in, journalists asking for comment, investors expressing concern, allies offering quiet support. She clicked through them with steady hands. Her reflection in the screen looked tired, but her eyes were alert. She thought of her father's words again. Change what happens after. That was the responsibility she carried. As she sat there, a memory from the earliest days of North Star flashed vividly. It was the night they landed their first major contract with a mid-size airline. Her team had celebrated with sparkling cider because none of them could afford champagne. Nadia had stood in that tiny apartment, server fans whirring, and said, "One day, they'll all depend on us, and when they do, we'll make sure they treat every passenger with dignity." Now, years later, the prophecy had twisted. The very system she built was being used inside an airline that treated her with contempt. The thought cut deep, but it also lit something inside her. She closed the laptop, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling. The house was quiet except for the kettle starting to whistle in the kitchen. She whispered to herself, low but firm, "They've underestimated me again." And in that whisper was a vow. Marcus knocked on the door. He poked his head in, hair falling into his eyes. "Mom, what if nothing changes? What if this just becomes another story people forget?" After a week, Nadia looked at him, this boy on the edge of adulthood, already scarred by what he had seen. "Then we make sure they can't forget," she said. "We decide what comes next." He stepped inside, uncertain. "But what can we do? They're huge. They're kestrel air." Nadia's lips curved into a small, weary smile. "And who do you think keeps their planes flying? Who runs the backbone of their systems? Who gives them the data they can't live without?" Marcus's eyes widened slowly as he understood. "You," he whispered. "Us," Nadia corrected. "North Star. Every key we've written, every server we've built. They lean on us more than they even realize." For the first time since the cuffs snapped around her wrists, Nadia felt steady again. Not triumphant, not vengeful, steady. The storm inside her was finding its course. Elaine called from the kitchen. "Tea's ready." Nadia rose from the chair, brushing her hand against the photograph of her father as she passed. His eyes seemed to watch her, approving. The night stretched ahead, but in her heart a new resolve was forming. She had been humiliated. Yes, but she had also been handed the very stage she needed. The question wasn't whether she would act. It was how. Morning sunlight streamed through the blinds when Nadia woke. She hadn't truly slept. Her dreams were stitched with fragments of flashing lights, the cold grip of handcuffs, Marcus's frightened voice echoing in the terminal. She sat at the edge of her bed, rubbing her wrists, still faintly red. From the kitchen downstairs came the clatter of pans. Elaine, already awake, moving like she always did, steady, reliable, a force of habit and love. Marcus was sprawled on the couch, his laptop open, eyes locked on the screen. When Nadia entered the living room, he turned the device toward her. Social media feeds spilled over with the story. Dozens of angles of her being led away by Port Authority officers. Passengers shouting in the background. Comments rushing by outrage, disbelief, racism barefaced in typed letters. "Mom, it's everywhere," Marcus said. His voice carried awe and anger. "Look." She paid the ticket. Flying while black, people are furious. Nadia watched the screen silently. Her own face stared back at her, stoic, refusing to break while hands clamped her arms. She heard the snippets of voices in the clips. "She doesn't belong up front," words sharpened into weapons. Elaine appeared with a mug of tea, setting it gently on the table. Once it's out there, you can't pull it back, she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. The whole country is watching now. By midday, journalists crowded outside their front gate in New Jersey. News vans idled along the street. Satellite dishes pointed skyward. Reporters called Nadia's name, thrusting microphones forward when she stepped onto the porch. Flashbulbs popped. She lifted a hand, shielding her eyes, but kept walking toward the mailbox, refusing to look cornered. A woman's voice rang clear. "Brooks, do you plan to sue Kestrel Air?" Another shouted, "Do you believe this was racial discrimination?" Questions pelted her like stones. Marcus, peering from behind the curtains, looked stricken. They're treating you like a celebrity and a criminal at the same time. Nadia returned inside without answering. Her silence was deliberate. She would not let her first response be raw anger. Later that afternoon, her phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages from investors, colleagues, allies. One was from an old friend, Renee Calder, now a journalist for a national outlet. "Call me. You need to control this story before they spin it." Nadia tapped her number. Renee answered on the first ring. "Nadia, I saw the footage. I'm sorry. It's disgusting. But listen, this isn't just another viral clip. It's lightning. If you speak now, you can shape it. If you stay silent, Kestrel will bury you under procedure and excuses." Nadia's voice was low but firm. "I'm not ready to speak. Not yet. I need them to show their hand first." Renee hesitated, then sighed. "Just don't wait too long. The public attention span is short. But for now, it's your move." When the call ended, Elaine placed a hand on Nadia's shoulder. "You know what you're doing," she said, "but don't forget, silence can also be mistaken for consent." Evening fell, and with it came the first official statement from Kestrel Air. Nadia read it on her phone as Marcus hovered close. Kestrel Air is committed to the highest standards of safety and customer service. While we cannot comment on individual cases, our procedures are designed to ensure fairness and compliance with all regulations. We regret any inconvenience experienced by Miss Brooks and her family. Inconvenience. Marcus spat. They called it inconvenience. Nadia set the phone down. It's the language of avoidance. They're hoping this fades. Elaine leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "Do you plan to let it?" Nadia didn't answer right away. She walked to the window, watching the reporters still waiting in the dark, their cameras glowing like restless fireflies. Inside her chest, humiliation churned into resolve. That night, she opened her laptop again. This time she didn't sift through emails. She pulled up internal dashboards only she had access to the heartbeat of North Star logic. Rows of numbers, graphs pulsing, servers humming across multiple time zones. And tucked inside those systems were the arteries that fed directly into Kestrel Air's operations passenger management. Data verification. Real-time analytics for boarding and ticketing. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Power trembled at her fingertips, but she didn't press. Not yet. The next morning, Marcus showed her another clip. A young woman who had been in line behind them at gate B22 had uploaded a video. In it, her voice trembled with anger as she narrated what she saw. They cuffed her in front of everyone. She showed her card. She showed her ID. They still dragged her away. And you know why? Because she's black. Don't tell me different. I saw their faces. I saw the way they looked at her. That was hate, plain and simple. The clip had already been viewed 2 million times. Nadia felt the heat rise in her throat, but she forced herself to stay calm. This wasn't just humiliation anymore. It was evidence. It was a spark catching fire. She sat at the dining table, Marcus on one side, Elaine on the other. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Finally, Elaine spoke. What now? Nadia, do you fight with words, or do you fight with what you've built? Nadia looked between them, her mother, weathered by years of indignity yet unbroken, and her son, just stepping into a world already teaching him his place. She drew a breath, steady and slow. I fight with both, she said. The words settled heavy in the room, carrying more than promise. They carried inevitability. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her COO at North Star Boss. We saw the news. Standing by. Whatever you need. Nadia stared at the message for a long moment, then locked the screen. Humiliation had been public. Release had been quiet. But her response would not be either. It would be deliberate. It would be unforgettable. The second day after the incident dawned gray and restless. Clouds hung low over Newark, heavy with the threat of rain. Inside the Brooks household, tension pressed down on every room like humidity. Reporters were still parked on the street, voices drifting faintly whenever the front door opened. Nadia rose early, long before Marcus stirred, and sat in her study with her laptop open. She had avoided this step until now, but the time for hesitation had ended. Her phone buzzed again with messages from colleagues. Some were supportive, others panicked. Investors wanted reassurance. Partners wanted to know if North Star logic would be dragged into scandal. The weight of silence had bought her one day. No more. She dialed a secure number. On the second ring, a familiar voice answered. Boss. It was Aaron Pierce, her chief operating officer, loyal, meticulous, the man she trusted to keep North Star humming when the world outside demanded her attention. Aaron, Nadia said, her voice steady, though her pulse quickened. I want you to initiate a full systems audit on Kestrel Air. Every node, every access point. Do not shut them down, but make it clear their operations depend on us. Aaron inhaled sharply on the other end. That's enormous. We're talking global impact. Nadia, flights in 3 continents rely on Kestrel systems. I'm aware, she replied, and I'm not asking you to disrupt passengers' safety. I want their leadership to feel the walls closing in. I want them to understand that if they humiliate me at a gate, they humiliate the woman whose company keeps their planes in the sky. Aaron was silent for a moment. Then his voice lowered, almost reverent. Consider it done. When the call ended, Nadia exhaled slowly. Her chest felt tight, not with fear, but with the gravity of the choice she had just made. This was not personal revenge. This was leverage, plain and cold. Downstairs, Marcus appeared in the kitchen in a wrinkled t-shirt, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Mornin', he mumbled, reaching for a cereal box. He paused when he noticed the intensity on his mother's face. Did you do something? Nadia met his gaze. I made a call. To who? She hesitated, then answered truthfully. To the people who make sure Kestrel Air can take off. Marcus's spoon clattered into the bowl. You mean North Star. You can actually stop them from flying. Nadia didn't flinch. I can make them remember who they depend on. Marcus blinked, somewhere between awe and fear. That's huge. Elaine entered then, tying her robe. She carried the faint scent of lavender lotion. Her eyes narrowed at her daughter. What did you do? Nadia, I reminded them of the truth. Nadia said that their empire rests on our backbone, and if they think they can treat us like we're invisible, they'll soon learn otherwise. Elaine's lips pressed into a line. Power is a sharp blade. Don't cut yourself while swinging it. I won't, Nadia promised, but in her mind, she knew the risk was real. By mid-afternoon, the effects began to ripple. News outlets reported unexpected system delays at Kestrel Air. Boarding passes weren't syncing. Flight manifests stalled. Passenger data updated sluggishly. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to snarl operations. On CNBC, a ticker scrolled Kestrel Air stock dropped 6% amid unexplained tech issues. Marcus sat glued to the television. That's you, isn't it? That's your call. Nadia stood behind him, arms crossed, her face unreadable. That's the sound of accountability knocking on their door. Later that evening, her phone rang again. Aaron's voice was brisk. They noticed. Their CIO is calling me nonstop. Do we escalate? Not yet, Nadia said. Keep the audit active, no real harm. Just enough disruption to remind them that dignity has consequences. When she hung up, she found Marcus watching her with wide eyes. Mom, you're like a superhero. She shook her head. No, Marcus, I'm just someone refusing to be silenced. Elaine listened from the corner of the living room. Superhero or not, you've started a fire, and fires spread. The next morning, the blaze had indeed spread. Headlines screamed Kestrel Air Crisis. Internal systems grind to a halt. Passengers stranded in Denver, Chicago, Dallas. Images of long lines at airports filled every news channel. Confused travelers spoke into cameras about missed connections and unanswered questions. In New York, the board of Kestrel convened an emergency meeting. Gerard Vance, the CEO, looked exhausted. Gray stubble shadowing his jaw. Find out what's happening. He barked at his executives. I don't care how. Fix it. But the truth was already clear to those in the room. The system disruptions were not random. They were a message, and everyone knew who had sent it. By noon, Gerard called Nadia directly. His voice was clipped, forced polite. Ms. Brooks, we need to talk. Nadia sat at her desk, Marcus nearby pretending not to eavesdrop. About what? Mr. Vance. You know what? Our operations are experiencing challenges. I believe you may have insight. Nadia let a pause stretch, savoring the weight of silence. Insight, perhaps. Influence, certainly. But before we discuss that, let's address what happened at Gate B-22. Gerard's voice tightened. That was unfortunate. An isolated mistake. Unfortunate, Nadia repeated, the word dripping with disdain. You cuffed a black woman in front of her son because a gate agent didn't think she belonged in first class. And now you want me to help you? He cleared his throat. We can work this out. Quietly. Nadia's voice lowered to a razor's edge. No, not quietly. The humiliation was public. The correction will be public. Until then, your airline will continue to feel the weight of dependency. Gerard exhaled sharply. What do you want? Nadia's gaze hardened. We'll get to that. But first, reflect on what it means that one woman's call can freeze your skies. She ended the call without waiting for his response. Marcus looked at her, his mouth slightly open. You just hung up on the CEO of Kestrel Air. Nadia rested her hands on the desk. Calm. He needed to understand who's in control. Elaine entered, her eyes sharp but not unsympathetic. You've declared war. Nadia, Make sure you're ready to win it without burning everything you've built." Nadia met her mother's gaze. "This isn't war. It's negotiation. The difference is whether they learn or collapse." Outside, the first raindrops began to fall, tapping against the windows like quiet applause. Inside, Nadia Brooks sat steady, knowing that humiliation had shifted into power, and that the story of Gate B-22 was no longer about a woman handcuffed in silence. It was about the one who chose to speak with thunder. The third morning arrived with no relief. Nadia woke to the hum of voices outside her home. Louder now, more frantic. News crews had doubled overnight. Satellite trucks lined the block. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, watching the circus unfold. Marcus stood at the window, phone in hand, recording the frenzy. "Mom, CNN is parked right across the street," he said. "They're live right now. They keep showing that clip of you walking in cuffs. Over and over." Elaine joined him, her arms folded. "They'll chew this story until there's nothing left but bones," she muttered. "You need to decide what you want to feed them." Nadia sipped her coffee, eyes fixed on the swirl of cream. The heat soothed her throat, but not her spirit. She could feel the weight of expectation pressing in. The silence she had held on to was starting to harden into suspicion. Was she plotting? Was she hiding? Was she afraid? At 9 her phone rang. Renee Calder's name flashed on the screen. Nadia stepped into the study and answered. "You're everywhere," Renee said without preamble. "Morning shows, evening shows, cable networks. Half the country is calling you a hero. The other half thinks you're some kind of cyber villain holding planes hostage. Kestrel's meltdown last night is front page on every outlet." Nadia rubbed her forehead. "That's not what we did. We kept people safe. No crashes, no threats. Just enough to remind them where the power lies." "I know," Renee said, "but perception is reality in media. And right now, the perception is spinning wild. I can help you. Nadia, let me run an interview, set the record straight. If you don't, Gerard Vance will. He's already booking a slot on prime time tonight." Nadia closed her eyes. She could almost see Gerard rehearsing lines in front of a mirror, blaming technical issues while avoiding the word discrimination. He would turn her into a ghost in her own story. "Not yet," Nadia whispered. Renee sighed audibly. "You're walking a fine line. Don't let him own the narrative." When she hung up, Marcus appeared in the doorway. "You should talk." "Mom, people want to hear you. I want to hear you." Nadia studied his face. There was hurt there, still raw from the humiliation at the gate, but also pride. She realized her silence was confusing him too. "Soon," she said softly, "but I won't let them dictate the terms." By noon, the storm escalated. Cable news ran split screens, stranded passengers in Dallas sleeping on floors, crying children at LAX, talking heads speculating on cyber sabotage. The crawl at the bottom of the screen read, "Kestrel Air in crisis as CEO Brooks." Responsible Nadia's inbox exploded. Some emails praised her as a symbol of resistance. Others hurled insults, calling her terrorist, angry black woman, unfit to lead. Investors demanded calls. North Star's board asked for reassurance. Aaron Pierce called, voice taut. "Nadia, they're throwing around words like sabotage. You need to be careful. This could invite regulators, or worse, I know," she said. "But what would you have me do? Sit quiet while they erase the truth of what happened at Gate B-22?" Aaron hesitated. "I trust you. Just Move wisely. They'll use every mistake against you. The storm grew louder still when Gerard Vance stepped onto live television that evening. Sitting across from a polished anchor, he wore a somber expression, the portrait of concern. At Kestrel Air, passenger safety is our top priority. Gerard said smoothly, "Yes, we've had some system difficulties. We are working tirelessly with our partners to resolve them. But I must be clear, no individual incident justifies jeopardizing tens of thousands of passengers. This is not about race. This is about ensuring our skies remain safe." Marcus threw a pillow at the TV. "He's lying. He's making it sound like you endangered people." Elaine shook her head slowly. "He's doing what men in power always do, turning the story so you're the villain and he's the savior." Nadia sat still, studying Gerard's performance. His voice never wavered. His hands rested calmly on the table. He was practiced, rehearsed, and yet, beneath the polish, she saw fear. He knew exactly where the pressure was coming from, and he couldn't name it on air. That night, Nadia opened her laptop again. Instead of dashboards, she pulled up news clips, comment threads, public reactions. She read them carefully, absorbing every perspective. Some broke her heart, passengers stranded, families disrupted. Others ignited her rage pundits, mocking her as a drama queen with a keyboard. Marcus came to her side, leaning over the arm of the chair. "Mom, you always told me to face problems head on. Why not now?" Nadia closed the screen, "Because the timing matters. If I speak too early, they'll paint me as reactive. If I wait too long, they'll say I'm weak. I need to speak when the silence itself becomes unbearable. Then they'll listen." Marcus frowned, trying to understand. "So you're waiting for the right moment to drop the truth?" "Yes," she said. "And when it comes, it won't just be truth, it will be undeniable." In the following days, the media storm only swelled. Protesters gathered outside Kestrel's headquarters in Manhattan, carrying signs that read, "Dignity denied" and "All seats belong." Civil rights leaders demanded accountability. Stock analysts downgraded Kestrel shares. Politicians tweeted support for Nadia, some cynically, others sincerely. But inside the Brooks home, life carried on in fragile routines. Elaine baked cornbread, humming old hymns under her breath. Marcus finished homework in bursts between scrolling through news feeds. Nadia answered only the most urgent emails, leaving the rest unread, piling into a mountain of expectation. One evening, as rain streaked the windows, Elaine sat across from her daughter at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. She studied Nadia in silence before speaking. "You remind me of your father when you get that look in your eyes," she said softly. "He used to sit just like that, quiet, but ready to move mountains." Nadia met her gaze. "And did he?" Elaine smiled sadly. "Not mountains, but he moved hearts. Sometimes that's harder." The words lingered. Nadia thought of her father again, of his lessons, of his belief that dignity was not given but carried. She wondered what he would say if he saw her now, if he would caution her, or cheer her, or simply hold her hand in the silence. That night, alone in her study, Nadia whispered to the empty room, "I will not be erased." The storm outside was no longer just media chatter, it was momentum, and Nadia Brooks knew that storms, once born, could not be contained. They had to be directed. The media storm did not calm. By the end of the week, Nadia's name had become shorthand for both outrage and possibility. Strangers painted her as a warrior, others as a villain. Everywhere she looked, her face was staring back on screens, in headlines, even in graffiti scrawled on a wall near Kestrel's Manhattan office, Nadia, truth. But inside her chest, the certainty she showed the world began to crack. It started one night, long after Elaine and Marcus had gone to bed. Nadia sat in her study, lights dimmed, staring at her reflection in the black screen of her powered-down laptop. She pressed her fingers against her temples, the weight of choices pressed hard. She had made the call that rattled an airline. She had turned humiliation into leverage. But leverage was not the same as victory. She whispered to herself, "Am I leading this, or just reacting?" The question stayed with her the next day. At breakfast, Marcus was animated, telling her about memes that painted her as a modern-day Rosa Parks of the skies. He grinned with teenage pride. "Mom, kids at school are saying you're a legend. Some even call you the woman who grounded Kestrel." She smiled faintly, but inside, doubt churned. Legends were easy to glorify on screens. Living through it was harder. Later that morning, Elaine joined her in the backyard garden, pulling weeds from soil damp with last night's rain. Birds trilled from the trees, oblivious to headlines and hashtags. Elaine straightened slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. "You're too quiet. Nadia," she said, "quiet is not your nature. Something's pressing you." Nadia leaned against the porch railing, arms folded. "What if I've gone too far? Mom, what if grounding Kestrel, even for a day, ends up hurting more people than it helps families stranded, children sleeping on airport floors? They didn't put cuffs on me. Why should they pay for it?" Elaine's gaze softened, but her voice stayed firm. "Don't confuse guilt with doubt. The guilt is theirs, not yours. But doubt is human. It means you still have a conscience." Nadia looked down at the grass, her shoes sinking slightly into the wet ground. A conscience doesn't get reform signed. It doesn't rewrite policies. It doesn't stop the next woman from being dragged away at a gate. Elaine stepped closer. Then ask yourself this: are you after punishment or change because the path you choose will shape what Marcus sees in you? The mention of Marcus cut deep. He had been restless at night. She knew. He masked it with bravado, but she heard his footsteps pace in his room long past midnight. She carried not only her own wounds, but his too. That evening, Marcus entered her study, holding his phone. His face was tight, eyes shadowed. "Mom, look at this." On the screen was a news clip of a stranded passenger at O'Hare Airport. A young mother with 2 children clinging to her legs. She was near tears, explaining how they had missed a funeral because of the system delays. "Everyone online is blaming you," Marcus said. "They're saying you caused this." Nadia's throat tightened. "I didn't cause it. Kestrel's choices did. My call only showed their dependence, but people don't see it that way," Marcus said, voice cracking. "They just see that Mom crying." For a long moment, the study was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Then Nadia spoke, her voice low. "This is what they want to turn the public against me, to blur the line between victim and cause." Marcus set the phone down on the desk. His hands shook slightly. "I just don't want them to hate you." Nadia reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Then I have to make sure they see the truth before it's too late." That night, sleep eluded her. She walked the hallways of her house in silence. the wood floor creaking under her bare feet. In the living room, she paused before the framed photograph of her father. His calm eyes stared back, a reminder of words he once told her, "You can't change how they see you, but you can change what they can't ignore." She whispered into the stillness, "What if I fail? Dad, what if I make it worse?" The shadows offered no answer. The following day, Nadia convened a private meeting at North Star's headquarters. Aaron Pierce and several board members sat around the polished table, their expressions tense. Charts and graphs glowed on the screen behind them, showing Kestrel's ongoing disruption. Aaron cleared his throat. "Nadia, the board is concerned. The perception of us holding Kestrel hostage is gaining traction. Regulators are sniffing. We can't risk the company's future on a personal battle." Nadia sat upright, her hands clasped. "This isn't personal. This is systemic. What happened at Gate B-22 is happening in countless ways to countless people. If we don't force accountability, who will?" One board member, gray-haired and weary, leaned forward. "We understand, Nadia, but perception matters more than intent. If we become the villain in this story, we lose contracts, we lose trust." For a moment, her resolve wavered. Was she in danger in everything she built? Was she risking her employees' livelihoods for her own justice? She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with renewed clarity. "This isn't just about me. It's about ensuring no one else has to endure that humiliation. If we have the power to push for change and we don't use it, then what's the point of having it?" The room fell silent. Even Aaron, ever pragmatic, gave a slow nod. After the meeting, alone in her office, Nadia stared out the window at the city skyline. Her reflection in the glass looked both strong and weary. She whispered to herself, "Purpose, not punishment." That night, Elaine found her still awake, papers scattered around her. She placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You've been wrestling with yourself," Elaine said, "but I see where it's leading. You're not driven by anger anymore. You're driven by responsibility." Nadia exhaled shakily. "I hope Marcus sees that too. I don't want him to think this is just vengeance." Elaine's voice softened. "Show him, then, not with words, with the choices you make from here." Nadia nodded slowly, a fragile calm settling over her. The doubt hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed. It wasn't an anchor dragging her down anymore. It was a compass, reminding her to stay true. Upstairs, Marcus lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. He wanted to believe his mom was unstoppable, but he also wanted her safe. He whispered into the darkness, "Please, Mom, don't get lost in this fight." And in the quiet house, doubt lingered like a shadow. But within Nadia Brooks, the shadow had begun to shift. It was no longer fear of falling. It was the pressure to rise. At Kestrel Air's headquarters in Midtown Manhattan, tension was as thick as the glass walls that overlooked the city. The boardroom was full executives in tailored suits, assistants whispering updates, lawyers clutching binders heavy with liability clauses. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and fear. Gerard Vance stood at the head of the table, his tie loosened, eyes red from lack of sleep. The company had bled nearly 15% of its market value in 3 days. Stockholders were restless, regulators were calling, and stranded passengers were flooding social media with stories of chaos. Every headline tied the mayhem back to one name, Nadia Brooks. He slammed a folder onto the table. "We're losing control of this narrative. Find me solutions, Not excuses. The chief information officer, a pale man named Curtis Greer, spoke carefully. Our systems are intact. Technically speaking, nothing is broken. The delays, the slowdowns, their intentional throttling from North Star logic. We're at their mercy. Gerard. A murmur rippled across the table. The chief legal officer leaned forward, voice sharp. So you're saying one vendor can choke this airline to death at will? Not one vendor, Curtis corrected nervously. One woman. The words hung in the air like a sentence passed down. A woman who had been dragged away at gate B-22 was now holding the company hostage without firing a single shot. Gerard rubbed his temples. How did we let it come to this? The chief operations officer shuffled papers, his voice low. There's more. We've had an internal leak. Emails between gate staff and supervisors are circulating online. They show profiling language, references to a priority index for first-class verification. One of the board members, a silver-haired woman, slammed her palm on the table. God Almighty. You mean we have written proof of racial bias in our internal communications? Curtis nodded grimly. It's out there. Renee Calder ran the story this morning. It's not speculation anymore. It's evidence. The room erupted, voices overlapping, fear mixing with anger. Someone demanded immediate termination of staff. Another argued they couldn't sacrifice employees without review. A third insisted the union would revolt. Gerard banged the table. Enough. We need a strategy. Not panic. But panic was already coursing through every vein of the company. Outside the boardroom, protesters chanted in the streets, their signs bobbing like a tide dignity in the skies. Justice for Nadia. All seats belong. Inside. The leaders of Kestrel Air faced the reality that their empire could topple, not from competition or fuel costs, but from the power of one woman's refusal to accept humiliation. Meanwhile, across the Hudson in Newark, Nadia watched the chaos unfold on her television. Marcus sat beside her, wide-eyed. Elaine stood with her arms folded, shaking her head slowly. They're tearing themselves apart, Marcus whispered. Look at them. They don't even know what to do. Nadia remained silent, studying Gerard's strained face as reporters replayed snippets from the boardroom leak. The camera caught him leaving the meeting, shoving past microphones, muttering no comment. His polished facade was cracking. Elaine finally spoke. They're bleeding. Nadia, and the world knows why. But tell me, what do you want the world to see from you? Nadia's throat tightened. For days, she'd carried herself like steel, projecting control. But in this moment, watching a corporation unravel, she felt the gravity of her choice more than ever. She wasn't simply fighting for herself anymore. The storm had grown larger, fed by every voice that had ever felt small at a gate, every passenger made to feel invisible. Later that night, Aaron Pierce called again. His voice rushed. Nadia, the board at Kestrel is in full meltdown. They're begging for negotiations and they'll offer settlements. No doubt. But listen, this is your window. You can either crush them or demand reforms that stick. Which way do you want to go? Nadia leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. Marcus sat across the room pretending to read, but his ears perked up. She knew he was listening. Reforms, she said finally. Crushing them isn't enough. If I burn them down, another airline rises in its place with the same rot inside. This has to mean more. Aaron hesitated. Then be ready, because they'll fight reforms harder than they'll fight fines. When the call ended, Marcus looked at her carefully. You could have said crush them. Why didn't you? Because vengeance is short-lived, Nadia answered softly. But change lasts. And you. Marcus, you deserve to live in the change. Not just the ashes. In Manhattan. Gerard poured whiskey into a glass, his hands trembling slightly. Alone in his office after the boardroom chaos, he stared out at the skyline. The city pulsed below, indifferent to his crisis. He whispered under his breath, "How did I let her get this far?" He thought back to the first reports from Gate B-22 when Tricia Millstone flagged a black woman as suspicious. He had barely noticed the memo then, buried under a dozen operational updates. Now that decision had set off an avalanche. One gate agent's bias had detonated into a corporate crisis that threatened to topple him. The phone on his desk buzzed. His assistant's voice came through, shaky. "Gerard, the governor's office is calling again. They want answers, and the White House liaison is asking for a briefing." Gerard closed his eyes, the weight nearly suffocating. Across the river, Nadia stood on her porch, the night air cool against her skin. Reporters were still out there, their cameras catching every flicker of movement. She didn't speak to them. Not yet. She closed her eyes and listened instead to the distant chant of protesters, to the quiet hum of traffic, to the memory of her father's voice telling her to change what comes after. Inside. Elaine prepared chamomile tea, the fragrance drifting through the house. Marcus sat at the table, sketching absent-mindedly in a notebook, drawing airplanes that looked like birds breaking free from cages. For the first time in days, Nadia allowed herself a small smile. Chaos was spreading in the boardroom, yes. But within her home, within her heart, clarity was beginning to take root. 2 days after the boardroom chaos, the air outside Kestrel Air's headquarters grew thicker with protest. Chants echoed through the streets. Reporters lined sidewalks shoulder to shoulder, and police barriers strained against the tide of voices demanding change. Inside, executives scurried like cornered animals. But the one person they feared most was seated miles away in her Newark home. Quiet, composed, waiting. That morning, Nadia's phone rang. It was Gerard Vance. His voice, stripped of its usual polish, was raw. "Ms. Brooks, we can't let this continue. I'm prepared to meet discreetly, off record. Let's end this before it spirals further." Nadia listened in silence, letting his words hang. When she finally spoke, her tone was measured steel. "No, Gerard. Discreet meetings are how systems like yours bury accountability. If you want to talk, it will be on record with transparency. The public humiliation was public. The remedy will be public too." He sighed audibly. "You're asking me to kneel in front of cameras. That's impossible." "What's impossible," Nadia replied, "is restoring trust without truth. Call me again when you're ready to speak honestly." She hung up before he could argue. Across the room, Marcus sat on the couch, pretending to scroll on his phone, though she knew he was listening. His eyes widened. "You just hung up on him again?" "Yes," Nadia said, her lips curving faintly, "because power without principle is worthless." Elaine, who had been folding laundry at the table, looked up. "He'll come back. Men like him always do when they realize money can't muffle dignity." By afternoon, her prediction proved true. Jared's legal team contacted Aaron Pierce, proposing mediated talks. They wanted confidentiality agreements, limits on public statements, and guarantees North Star wouldn't escalate disruptions. Aaron relayed the details in a conference call. "They're trying to box you in," Aaron warned. "If you sign, they control the story." Nadia shook her head. "No NDAs, no gag orders. We meet, and everything stays on the record. Otherwise, there is no meeting." Aaron exhaled slowly. "You're holding the line harder than I expected." "I have to," Nadia said. "If I waver now, it tells every black woman watching that our dignity is negotiable. It's not." That evening, Marcus sat with her on the porch steps, the sky bruised with twilight. He fidgeted, then asked, "Mom, what if they never agree to your terms? What if they'd rather crash than change?" She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we keep showing the world the truth until the pressure makes them choose. Change doesn't come because they want it. It comes because they can't survive without it." The next morning, Kestrel caved. Gerard called again, his voice brittle. "Fine. Public. On record. We'll meet tomorrow at our headquarters. Cameras allowed. But if this turns into a circus, it already is a circus." Nadia interrupted softly. "I'm simply stepping into the ring." The news broke within the hour. Nadia Brooks and Kestrel CEO to hold historic meeting. Media swarmed with speculation. Commentators called it unprecedented, an airline COO forced to sit down, on record, with the very woman they had humiliated. Protest leaders declared victory, though cautiously. Passengers stranded in airports watched closely, their frustration now intertwined with hope. The following day, Nadia dressed not in corporate armor but in quiet dignity, a navy blue suit, simple pearl earrings, her hair pulled back neatly. Elaine adjusted her collar with trembling hands. "You carry more than yourself today," her mother whispered. "Walk in with that truth." Marcus hugged her tightly before she left, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "Make them hear you." Mom. At Kestrel headquarters, the lobby had been transformed into a stage. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters murmured into microphones, their words crackling across live broadcasts. Employees stood in clusters, whispering nervously. Gerard arrived first, flanked by lawyers and aides. His smile was brittle, stretched too thin. When Nadia entered, the room shifted, the cameras turned, bulbs flashed, the hum of whispers swelled. She walked steadily to the table where 2 microphones awaited. Gerard extended a hand. After a pause, Nadia accepted it firm, brief, without pretense. They sat. Silence hung for a heartbeat before Gerard leaned toward his mic. "We are here today to address the unfortunate events of last week, as well as the operational challenges that followed. Our commitment is to resolve this with dignity for all parties involved." Nadia folded her hands, then spoke. Her voice was calm but unyielding. "What happened at Gate B-22 was not an unfortunate event. It was discrimination, plain and deliberate. I was handcuffed in front of my son because your staff decided my face did not fit their image of first class. That is not misfortune. That is systemic bias." Gasps rippled through the room. Gerard's jaw tightened, but Nadia pressed on, and when confronted with the fallout, your first instinct was to minimize it, to call it an inconvenience, to bury it in procedure. That's why we are here, not because of one incident, but because your system enabled it, excused it, and would have buried it had the world not seen. Gerard cleared his throat. "Ms. Brooks, I understand your anger, but this isn't anger," Nadia cut in, her eyes piercing his. "This is clarity, and clarity demands accountability. You want your systems back at full capacity. You want trust restored, then commit publicly to reforms. End racial profiling in your verification processes. Install transparent oversight. Train your staff not just to serve, but to respect. The room buzzed with tension. Reporters scribbled furiously. Gerard's aides shifted in their seats. Gerard forced a smile. We are, of course, open to reviewing our policies. Not reviewing, Nadia said sharply. Rebuilding. The cameras caught the moment his face strained, hers resolute. The power dynamic had flipped. For nearly an hour, they went back and forth. Gerard tried to steer toward corporate speak, vague commitments, procedural promises. Nadia countered with specifics, timelines, independent audits, public reporting. She refused to let him hide behind empty words. Finally, worn down, Gerard exhaled heavily. If we agree to these terms, will you end the disruptions? Nadia leaned slightly forward, her voice steady. I never endangered your passengers. I never sought chaos. What I sought was recognition that dignity is not optional. Honor these commitments, and the systems will hum again. Break them, and the skies will remind you who sustains them. The cameras captured every syllable. When the session ended, Gerard stood quickly, retreating behind his aides. But Nadia remained seated, allowing the cameras to linger on her calm expression. She wasn't just speaking to him, she was speaking to every viewer, every passenger, every worker who had ever felt unseen. As she walked out of the building, the crowd outside erupted in cheers. Protesters lifted their signs higher, chanting her name. Nadia paused at the top of the steps, raising her chin slightly, acknowledging their voices without words. Elaine and Marcus watched from home, their eyes wet. Elaine whispered, "She did it. She made them listen." Marcus smiled faintly, whispering back, "That's my mom." But deep inside, Nadia knew this was only the beginning. Negotiations had begun. Now came the battle to ensure promises became practice. The morning after the public negotiation, headlines split the country in two. Some praised Nadia as a pioneer, the woman who forced a corporate giant to its knees. Others condemned her as reckless, accusing her of endangering passengers and abusing her company's influence. On breakfast TV, a conservative commentator sneered into the camera, "This isn't courage. This is blackmail. Ms. Brooks used her power to sabotage air travel, to hold everyday Americans hostage in her personal vendetta. We should be asking if she belongs in prison, not in a boardroom." Elaine muted the screen before Marcus could throw something at it. "Don't waste your energy on their poison," she said, but her voice carried a tremor. Marcus turned to his mother, his fists clenched. "They're twisting everything. They're making you the villain." Nadia's face remained calm, but her fingers tapped the table softly, betraying the current beneath. That was always going to happen. When you confront power, it doesn't bow, it bites, but bites can't erase truth. Still, the backlash was fierce. Online, hashtags multiplied. Shaka Justice for Nadia competed with Knockert grounded by Brooks. Lawsuits were hinted at. A senator called for hearings on private corporations sabotaging national infrastructure. The FBI quietly opened an inquiry. Aaron Pierce called that afternoon, his voice tense. "Nadia, this is heating faster than we thought. Regulators are circling. If they frame this as cyber interference, we could face crippling sanctions." "I didn't sabotage them," Nadia said firmly. "I slowed them down just enough to show dependence. No harm to passengers, no safety risk. That distinction matters." To lawyers, to regulators? Maybe not, Aaron countered. They see headlines, not nuance. We need to prepare for defense. And Nadia, you might need to consider stepping back as CEO temporarily. The words hit her like ice. Step back for demanding dignity. It's not about right or wrong, Aaron said. It's about survival. North Star can't afford to sink with you. After the call, Nadia sat in silence. Her eyes drifted to Marcus, sprawled on the couch with his textbooks untouched, his face drawn. For the first time, she wondered if fighting so publicly had cost her son the quiet normalcy every teenager deserved. That evening, Elaine found her daughter standing in the kitchen, staring at a kettle boiling. The whistle shrieked, but Nadia didn't move until her mother switched it off. "You're not a woman who stands still," Elaine said gently, "but I see the weight pressing you." Nadia's voice cracked for the first time. "What if they destroy everything I built? Mom, North Star, my name, Marcus's future, all because I refused to stay quiet." Elaine placed both hands on her shoulders, steady and warm. "Then at least you will know you didn't sell your dignity for comfort. And Marcus will learn that silence is not survival, it's surrender." The words steadied her, but the storm outside only grew. 2 days later, a televised town hall was announced. Civil rights leaders, legal experts, and airline executives were invited. To Marcus's surprise, Nadia agreed to attend. "Mom, you know they'll come at you with everything," he warned. "I know," she replied, "but if I let others tell my story, I've already lost." The auditorium was packed the night of the event. Cameras panned across a divided crowd, some holding signs of support, others jeering. On stage, Nadia sat beneath the glare of lights, her calm presence contrasting with the buzz of voices. Gerard Vance sat several seats away, stiff in his suit, his jaw clenched. The moderator, a well-known anchor, began. "Tonight, we ask, was Nadia Brooks a hero of justice, or did she cross a line that endangers us all?" The first questions were sharp. A passenger stranded in Houston demanded, "Why should my family suffer so you could prove a point?" Nadia's response was measured. "I hear your pain, and I regret the hardship, but understand your suffering was not caused by my actions alone. It was caused by a system that allowed discrimination to operate unchecked until someone forced it into the light." The audience murmured, some nodding, others frowning. Next, a legal expert accused her of corporate abuse. "Miss Brooks, isn't it true you weaponized North Star's systems to strong-arm an airline into submission? How is that ethical?" Nadia met his gaze. "Ethics without accountability is decoration. I didn't endanger passengers. I didn't crash planes. I used the only language this corporation understands: leverage. And I used it not for profit, but for justice." Applause broke out, scattered but strong. Then the moderator turned to Gerard. "Mr. Vance, what is your response?" Gerard leaned forward, his voice heavy with controlled outrage. "My response is simple. One person should not have the power to cripple an airline. This is bigger than discrimination. It's about national security. If Ms. Brooks believes humiliation justifies chaos, what stops others from doing the same?" Boos and cheers collided in the audience. Nadia spoke before the moderator could pivot. "What stops others is conscience. What stopped me from taking this further was responsibility. But what stops airlines like yours from humiliating passengers? Nothing until now." The clash was electric. Headlines exploded overnight. Clips of her answers went viral. Memes flooded social media, her face superimposed with the words, "Dignity is not negotiable." But so did the backlash. Politicians demanded oversight. Investors whispered about her being a liability. Even within North Star, some board members questioned her judgment. Back at home, Marcus scrolled through his phone, his emotions tangled. "Mom, some people say you're tearing the country apart. Others say you're saving it. How can you be both?" Nadia sat beside him, pulling him close. Because truth always divides before it unites. People fear change before they embrace it. Elaine, listening quietly, added, "And sometimes the storm is the only way to clear the sky." That night, Nadia lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her doubt returned, sharper now. Was she truly building change, or had she unleashed a chaos too large to control? In the dark, she whispered to herself, "Purpose, not punishment. Purpose." But even as she repeated the words, she knew the backlash was far from over, and the next move would demand more from her than she had ever given before. 2 days after the stormy town hall, a new thread entered the narrative, one that Nadia hadn't anticipated. It began with a message in her encrypted inbox, marked anonymous. The subject line read simply, "I worked inside Kestrel. I know what they've hidden." Nadia hesitated before clicking. Elaine, who sat across the kitchen table sipping tea, noticed her daughter's face shift. "What is it?" "Maybe nothing," Nadia murmured, but her pulse quickened. She opened the file attached. Inside were scans of internal Kestrel documents, emails, training slides, policy notes. Words leapt out: profile scoring, discretionary verification, first-class optics, phrases coded but clear guidelines that encouraged gate staff to evaluate who looked like they belonged in premium cabins. She read them twice, then sat back, stunned. This isn't one gate agent. This is systemic. They built this into their policies. Elaine's brow furrowed. So it was never about one mistake. They designed the mistake. Before Nadia could reply, Marcus bounded into the room with his phone in hand. "Mom, you have to see this." He thrust it toward her. A young man in his 20s appeared in a shaky video, sitting in what looked like a dimly lit apartment. "My name is Daniel Holt," he said, voice low but steady. "I worked in Kestrel's IT department. I can't stay silent anymore. Their system flags passengers using bias-coded algorithms. If you're black, if you're Latino, if you're Middle Eastern, you're more likely to be flagged as verification required. Management knew. They told us it was for security. It wasn't. It was profiling." The video cut off abruptly, but the impact was seismic. Marcus's eyes were wide. "It already has 500,000 views. People are calling him a hero." Nadia's mind raced. She remembered the anonymous message in her inbox. Was Daniel the sender, or was he one of many? Her phone buzzed almost immediately. Renee Calder's voice came crackling through. "Nadia, did you see this whistleblower video? It changes everything. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about every passenger flagged unfairly. We're talking lawsuits, congressional hearings, maybe even federal intervention." Nadia exhaled. "So the rot goes deeper than even I thought." That night, she lay awake again, but not with doubt, with fire. The humiliation she endured had opened a crack, and now truth was flooding through. She whispered to herself, "This is bigger than me. This is a reckoning." The following day, Kestrel scrambled to contain the damage. Gerard Vance appeared on camera again, this time flanked by lawyers. His tone was defensive. These so-called whistleblower claims are exaggerated, taken out of context. Our policies are designed to ensure safety and customer experience. We do not, and have never, condoned discrimination. But the denial rang hollow. Too many documents were circulating, too many employees whispering to journalists. The storm Nadia had ignited was now powered by voices from within Kestrel itself. Aaron Pierce called from North Star headquarters. "Nadia, you're vindicated. Whistleblowers are confirming everything. But listen, the government's watching closer now. Regulators might drag us into hearings too, since North Star operates their systems," Nadia answered firmly. "Then we tell the truth. We've built systems, but we don't control how Kestrel chose to use them. We don't design bias. They do." Aaron was quiet for a moment. "You realize you're putting yourself at the center of this storm for good? There's no stepping back now." "I never planned to step back," Nadia said. In the days that followed, Daniel Holt's video became a rallying point. Activists called for a full investigation into Kestrel's practices. Hashtags surged again, profiles exposed, justice in the skies. Protesters no longer gathered just outside Kestrel's headquarters. They appeared at airports across the country, holding signs that read, "I could be Nadia." But backlash surged too. On talk radio, pundits painted Daniel as a disgruntled employee chasing fame. Anonymous threats flooded his social media accounts. Some labeled him a liar, others a traitor. He disappeared from public view after releasing a second short video. This one saying simply, "If anything happens to me, Kestrel knows why." Marcus asked his mother one night, "Do you think he's safe?" Nadia paused. "I hope so, but truth-tellers rarely walk an easy road." Elaine set down her knitting, her eyes sharp. "Then make sure his truth isn't wasted. Don't let them bury him." Nadia nodded, knowing the responsibility stretched further now. It wasn't just about demanding reforms. It was about protecting the people brave enough to expose the system. The breakthrough came when congressional leaders announced plans for hearings on airline discrimination. Nadia's name was listed alongside Daniel Holt's as key witnesses. The moment she read the announcement, her breath caught. This wasn't just a corporate battle anymore. It was about to become a national reckoning. That night, Nadia sat with Marcus in the living room. He leaned against her shoulder, unusually quiet. "You're going to Washington, aren't you?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly. "Are you scared?" Nadia thought for a moment. "Yes, but I'm more scared of doing nothing. Because if I stay silent, what happened to us at Gate B-22 will happen to countless others. And maybe next time, the cameras won't be rolling. No one will know." Marcus's eyes glistened. "I hate that you have to carry this, but I'm proud too." Elaine, listening from the armchair, added, "He's right. Fear doesn't mean weakness. Nadia, it means you understand the cost and you're willing to pay it." Nadia smiled faintly, her heart heavy but resolute. The humiliation that began at a single gate had grown into a national movement. And now, with whistleblowers stepping forward, with hearings on the horizon, the fight for dignity was no longer hers alone. It was everyone's. The announcement of congressional hearings landed like a thunderclap. News outlets ran banners across their screens, Brooks to testify on airline discrimination. Overnight, Nadia's name became shorthand for an impending showdown not just with Kestrel Air, but with the political machinery of Washington, at North Star headquarters. Aaron Pierce rushed into Nadia's office, a stack of briefing folders under his arm. "We need to prepare." The hearings will be brutal. They'll grill you not only about what happened at Gate B-22, but also about North Star's role in the system's slowdowns. We can't walk in blind. Nadia accepted the folders but didn't open them. Instead, she looked out at the city skyline. They want to paint me as reckless. I need to remind them that what's reckless is humiliating paying passengers because of the color of their skin. Aaron sighed. I know. But remember, they don't just want your truth, they want headlines. Some senators will come at you for justice. Others will come at you for spectacle. Elaine, who had accompanied her daughter that morning, leaned against the doorframe. Then give them something they can't twist. Speak plain. Speak human. The truth doesn't need big words. Nadia smiled faintly. That's always been your lesson, Mom. Meanwhile, in Washington, preparations churned with intensity. Staffers filled briefing rooms with binders of data, consultants drafted sound bites for senators, and lobbyists worked overtime to protect airline interests. Gerard Vance was already in the Capitol, quietly meeting with allies. In one closed-door meeting, Gerard slammed his fist on the table. If she turns this into a civil rights circus, we're finished. We need senators in our corner, reminding the public this is about security, not discrimination. A lobbyist nodded. We've arranged talking points, emphasize national safety, downplay bias, frame her as a tech CEO overstepping bounds. Gerard gritted his teeth. Make sure they hit her hard. She humiliated me once. It won't happen again. Back in Newark. Nadia sat with Marcus at the dining table, reviewing the whistleblower documents again. Marcus watched her closely. Are you nervous about testifying? Yes, she admitted. But nerves are a sign you care. And I care deeply, not just about me, but about everyone who's been quietly profiled while no cameras were rolling. Marcus nodded slowly, then whispered, I'll be watching. Every word. The day of the hearings arrived with a cold wind sweeping over Capitol Hill. Nadia stepped out of the black SUV, flanked by Aaron and Renee Calder, who had insisted on coming as an informal advisor. Cameras flashed instantly. Protesters lined the steps, their chants echoing between marble columns. Justice in the skies, stand with Nadia inside. The hearing chamber buzzed with anticipation. Senators shuffled papers. Aides adjusted microphones. Reporters whispered into recorders. Daniel Holt sat quietly in the second row, his presence both fragile and powerful. When Nadia was sworn in, the room hushed. She placed her hand firmly on the Bible, her voice steady as she promised to tell the truth. The first senator, a graying man with a clipped accent, leaned forward. Ms. Brooks, let's begin simply. On the night in question, did you or did you not order your company to intentionally disrupt Kestrel Air's systems? Nadia met his gaze without blinking. I ordered an audit that slowed operations. No passenger safety was compromised, no flights were endangered. The purpose was to demonstrate dependency, not to create chaos. Another senator interjected sharply. So, you admit to weaponizing your company's control of airline systems to settle a personal grievance. Her voice sharpened, though calm. It was never personal. It was systemic. I was humiliated because of my race in front of my son, and when Kestrel tried to dismiss it as inconvenience, I used the only language they understand, leverage, because without leverage, truth gets buried. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Cameras zoomed in. Then a younger senator, a woman of color, leaned in. Ms. Brooks, many Americans watching today feel they've experienced similar humiliation, but lacked the platform or power to fight back. What you say to them, Nadia's throat tightened briefly, but she spoke with warmth. I say this, you are not invisible. Your dignity is not negotiable. And even if you don't have the power to ground an airline, your voice matters. What happened to me was one spark, but the fire belongs to all of us. Applause broke out from the audience, quickly silenced by the gavel. Gerard Vance testified later that day, his tone defensive. These hearings should not be about one isolated incident. Airlines must have the right to verify passengers for security. Ms. Brooks's actions endangered thousands. She set a dangerous precedent. Nadia listened quietly, but when given a chance to respond, she struck with precision. Mr. Vance speaks of security, but security without fairness is tyranny. He talks of precedent. The precedent I want to set is simple. No passenger should be treated as a suspect because of their skin color. That's not security. That's discrimination. The room erupted again, this time louder. After hours of questioning, the session ended. Nadia walked out into the crisp evening air, exhaustion heavy on her shoulders. Reporters shouted questions, microphones shoved close, but she kept walking. Elaine, watching from home, whispered to the television, "You did it, baby. You spoke plain. You made them hear." Marcus, seated beside her, simply said, "That's my mom." Later, in the quiet of her hotel room, Nadia sat at the edge of the bed, shoes off, hair loose. Aaron knocked softly before entering. "You were brilliant," he said, "but prepare yourself. The backlash will double. Gerard's allies won't let this go quietly." Nadia nodded slowly. Let them come. The truth is louder now than their excuses. As she closed her eyes that night, she felt both drained and alive. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, she sensed the ground shifting not just beneath Kestrel, but beneath an entire industry. The government's pressure might break her, or it might break open the very change she had fought for since that night at Gate B-22. The morning after Nadia's testimony, the world seemed to divide more sharply than ever. Supporters hailed her as fearless, their posts flooding social media with clips of her declaring dignity is not negotiable. Civil rights groups announced rallies in her honor. Yet, at the same time, the counterattack gathered force like a storm wall. On the front page of a major newspaper, the headline screamed, "Did Nadia Brooks abuse her power below it?" A column accused her of destabilizing an entire industry to settle a personal score. Pundits on television repeated the words reckless, dangerous, and unfit. At North Star headquarters, Aaron Pierce called an emergency board meeting. The conference room was packed with directors, their faces a mix of concern and outright fear. Charts on the screen showed a dip in contracts, airlines considering alternatives to North Star's systems, and investors pulling back. One director leaned forward, voice sharp. "Nadia is risking everything. Our reputation, our market value, our survival. We cannot tie this company to her crusade any longer." Another added, "If regulators paint us as complicit, we'll be crippled. We need to distance ourselves. A leadership transition may be the only option." Aaron raised his hand, trying to calm the room. "Let's not forget why we're here. Without Nadia's vision, North Star wouldn't exist, and she's not wrong. Kestrel's practices are indefensible. This fight may cost us in the short term, but in the long term, it puts us on the right side of history." The board remained divided, voices clashing, but the threat was clear. Nadia's position as CEO was now under attack from within her own walls. That evening, Aaron visited Nadia in her hotel room. He carried the weight of the meeting on his shoulders. "They're circling," he admitted. "The board is talking about forcing you to step aside. Temporarily, they say, but we both know how that ends." Nadia sat at the window, the city lights glittering beyond the glass. Her voice was calm, almost resigned. "I knew this would come. Power doesn't forgive those who challenge it, even my own." Aaron pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. "These are the letters, requests for reassurance from our biggest clients. If you step down, even just in name, it might calm them. If you don't—" He didn't finish. Nadia looked at the folder but didn't touch it. "And what do you think? Aaron, you've stood by me from the beginning." He hesitated, then said quietly, "I think you're right. I think this fight matters more than quarterly numbers, but I also think you have to be prepared. If they oust you, don't let them bury you. Use it." Nadia's lips curved into a faint smile. "You've learned well. Purpose, not punishment. Even in loss, purpose can win." Meanwhile, Gerard Vance seized his moment. On national television, he sat with a sympathetic host, his demeanor polished once again. "Air travel is the backbone of this nation," Gerard declared, "and yet one executive chose to jeopardize it for personal gain. This is not justice, it's vigilantism. We cannot allow corporate leaders to weaponize infrastructure. It's a threat to national security." Clips of his interview spread quickly. Hashtags like Brooks threat and Haas corporate sabotage began trending. A senator who had grilled Nadia at the hearing announced a proposal for stricter oversight of private tech firms managing public systems. Marcus watched the news at home with Elaine, his fists clenched. "They're smearing her. Grandma. They're trying to erase everything she said." Elaine rested a hand on his arm. "They can smear, they can twist, but the truth has a way of outlasting lies. Your mama knows that." In Washington, Renee Calder met with Nadia over coffee in a quiet corner of a cafe. Her notebook brimmed with scribbles. "You've rattled them," Renee said. "Gerard's counterattack is slick, but it reeks of fear. He knows the whistleblower documents are real. He knows more are coming. But the question is, can you survive the smear campaign long enough for the truth to drown him?" Nadia stirred her coffee slowly. Survival has never been guaranteed, but silence was never an option. Later that night, Nadia received another encrypted message. This one was bolder. "There are more files. Kestrel buried reports from internal audits showing racial disparities. I can get them to you, but it's dangerous. Trust only a direct handoff." She stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. The documents she already had were damning, but internal audits would be undeniable. Proof not just of bias in theory, but in practice measured, recorded, ignored. She called Aaron immediately. "I have a lead. If it's real, it could end this, but it's risky." Aaron's voice was low. "Then we need to move carefully. If Kestrel realizes employees are leaking, they'll clamp down hard. We can't expose a whistleblower." Nadia looked at the city skyline again, the lights flickering like signals. "This is bigger than me now, bigger than North Star. If these files exist, we don't hide them. We bring them into the light." Back at Kestrel headquarters, Gerard convened his inner circle. Curtis Greer, the CIO, slid a report across the table. "We've traced the leaks. They came from a restricted server. Only a handful of employees had access." We believe Daniel Holt wasn't alone. Gerard's eyes narrowed. Find the others, and make sure nothing else reaches her hands. If more files leak, it won't just be my job, it'll be the company's collapse. Curtis hesitated. Gerard, what if the files are already gone? What if she already has them? Gerard slammed his palm against the table. Then we destroy her before she can use them. The counterattack was no longer just in headlines and boardrooms. It was personal. Kestrel would fight with every tool at its disposal, from lobbyists to lawsuits to whispered threats. And Nadia Brooks, seated in her hotel room with the glow of her laptop on her face, knew the storm was only deepening. But so too was the clarity of her purpose. She whispered to herself, purpose, not punishment, even if they strip everything else away. The counterattack didn't just play out in headlines and hearings. It crept into Nadia's personal life like a shadow that wouldn't lift. It started with the phone calls. Unknown numbers lighting up her screen at all hours, some silent, some filled with whispered slurs before disconnecting. Then came the emails, doctored photos, vile threats, claims that she should go back where you belong. Marcus discovered one of the messages when he borrowed her tablet for homework. His face went pale as he read the words. Mom, they're threatening you. They're threatening me. Nadia gently closed the tablet, her eyes steady though her chest tightened. That's what cowards do when they can't win with truth. They try to scare you into silence. But what if one of them actually does something? Marcus's voice cracked. What if they hurt you or me? Elaine wrapped an arm around her grandson. Hate shouts loudest when it's cornered. It doesn't mean it wins. She looked at her daughter with quiet resolve. But maybe it's time to bring in protection. Nadia reluctantly agreed. By the next day, plainclothes security from North Star shadowed their movements at home, at school, at the office. Marcus hated it, muttering that he felt like a prisoner. Yet he didn't complain when one guard discreetly intercepted a stranger who had followed him from the subway. The toll wasn't just physical, it seeped into their relationships too. Old friends stopped calling, unsure of what to say. Invitations dried up. At school, Marcus overheard classmates whispering about his mother being the lady who shut down flights. One boy sneered, "Your mom ruined my uncle's vacation." Marcus punched him, earning a suspension. When Nadia picked him up from the principal's office, he refused to meet her eyes. "I'm tired of being their target. I'm tired of being your son." The words sliced through her. That night, as Marcus slept with his face turned to the wall, she sat on the edge of his bed and whispered, "I never wanted this weight for you. I only wanted you to walk through the world without chains of suspicion." Her tears fell silently onto the blanket. Meanwhile, at North Star, the board intensified its pressure. Anonymous leaks suggested that Nadia might face ouster. Analysts speculated about her dwindling grip on leadership. Aaron shielded her as best he could, but even he admitted the walls were closing in. One evening, after a grueling day of damage control, he found her in the empty conference room, staring at the city lights. "You can still step back, Nadia," he said softly. "Let me hold the line. Let the board breathe. You don't have to carry this alone." She shook her head. "If I step back now, it tells every black woman watching that the price of dignity is silence, and I won't teach my son that silence is survival." Aaron studied her, then nodded slowly. "Then we'll weather it together." But the hardest blow came from Elaine, not in anger, but in fear. One night. She clutched her chest, her breath ragged. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital. The diagnosis, stress-induced arrhythmia. As Nadia sat beside her mother's bed, guilt gnawed at her. Elaine, pale but resolute, squeezed her hand. "Don't you dare blame yourself. I'd rather my heart break from standing beside you than beat steady in cowardice." Still, Nadia felt the weight heavier than ever. Every choice seemed to demand sacrifice not just from her, but from those she loved most. In quieter moments, doubt whispered cruelly. Was she truly fighting for justice, or dragging her family through a war they hadn't chosen? Was the cost too high one night, unable to sleep? She walked through the silent streets near her hotel. The city hummed around her, indifferent to her struggle. A stranger passed and muttered something under his breath, the tone unmistakably hostile. Nadia's steps faltered, her chest tightening. For the first time, she considered what surrender might feel like. Yet, in the stillness, another memory surfaced: Marcus as a boy, asking why people sometimes looked at him differently on the playground. Her promise to him one day, "You'll walk into any room and know you belong." That promise burned brighter than fear. The next morning, she returned to North Star headquarters with steel in her eyes. To the board, to the media, to the world, she would not flinch. At home. Marcus noticed the change. When she sat at the table that night, her back straighter, her voice firmer, he studied her silently. Finally, he asked, "How do you keep going?" "Mom." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "Because every time I want to stop, I remember who's watching. You, Grandma, Daniel Holt, every person who's been told they don't belong. I keep going because if I stop, they win." Marcus squeezed her hand back, his voice soft. "Then don't stop. Not ever." It wasn't absolution. It wasn't an erasure of the pain or the fear. But, in that moment, Nadia felt something deeper than resolve. She felt anchored. Even as hate closed in, even as costs mounted, the fight remained hers to carry, and she would carry it. The storm reached its fiercest point when the board delivered its ultimatum. One by one, the directors filed into the conference room, their faces stiff, their voices rehearsed. Aaron sat to Nadia's right, silent but visibly bracing. The chairman, an older man with silver hair and a reputation for caution, cleared his throat. "Ms. Brooks, the board recognizes your contributions to North Star logic. None of us deny the brilliance that built this company. But, given the controversy, the regulatory scrutiny, and the mounting public division, we've concluded that the best path forward is for you to voluntarily step aside as CEO effective immediately." The words dropped like stones in water, sending ripples through the room. Nadia didn't flinch. Her eyes scanned the table, reading the unease in some faces, the satisfaction in others. "And if I refuse," she asked. Another director leaned forward. "Then we moved to a formal vote of removal. We'd prefer not to, but we cannot risk the survival of the company for your personal crusade." Aaron finally spoke, his voice tight. "With all respect, this is short-sighted. If you think forcing her out will calm regulators or restore contracts, you're mistaken. Nadia is North Star's face. Removing her only fuels the narrative that we abandon our leaders when they fight for justice." But the board had already made up its mind. They shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Nadia's gaze. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "You think this is about me. It isn't. It's about whether a company that runs on truth can stomach truth when it's inconvenient. You want me gone? Fine, but don't delude yourselves. This isn't saving North Star. This is fear dressing itself up as strategy. The chairman's gavel of authority, figurative though it was, came down with finality. We'll reconvene tomorrow for the formal vote. That evening, Aaron walked Nadia out of headquarters. The weight of what had transpired pressed on both of them. We could still fight this, he said. You have allies on the board. We might sway a few votes. Nadia shook her head. I won't beg for a seat at a table I built. If they want me gone, I'll walk before they push me. But I won't walk quietly at home. Marcus was waiting. His face tightened when he saw his mother's expression. They're trying to fire you, aren't they? Yes, she said softly. Tomorrow they'll vote. He slammed his textbook shut. After everything, after you built that company, after you fought for justice, how can they just throw you out? Nadia placed a hand on his shoulder. Because fear makes people do strange things. Fear of losing money, fear of standing out, fear of change. Marcus's eyes glistened. So, what are you going to do? I'm going to remind them that losing me doesn't silence the truth. It only amplifies it. Elaine, listening from the kitchen doorway, spoke in her steady tone. Then say it plain. Nadia, whatever you do, don't leave them guessing. The next day, the board assembled again. This time, journalists had already caught wind of the drama, their cameras stationed outside the building, inside. The air crackled with tension. Nadia entered the room, not as a woman defeated, but as one stepping into battle. She wore a dark suit, her posture unbreakable. Aaron walked beside her, chin high. When the chairman called for final statements before the vote, Nadia stood. Silence swept across the table. You want to remove me because I embarrassed Kestrel, because I used leverage you're afraid of, because I said out loud what others prefer. Whispered, fine. Remove me. But remember, this North Star was not built on timidity. It was built on courage, the courage to see what others couldn't, and to speak what others wouldn't. If you trade courage for comfort, this company may survive the quarter, but it won't survive history. Her voice never rose, but it carried like thunder. A few directors shifted, guilt flickering across their faces. But when the vote was called, the numbers were clear, 7 for removal, 4 against. The gavel came down. Ms. Brooks, thank you for your service. Aaron's jaw tightened, but Nadia didn't flinch. She gathered her papers, rose from her seat, and looked each director in the eye. History won't thank you for this. Outside, reporters swarmed. Microphones shoved forward. Ms. Brooks, are you resigning? Were you forced out? Do you regret your actions? She stopped on the steps, the flash of cameras surrounding her. Marcus and Elaine stood in the crowd, watching. Her voice rang out clear. Yes, the board has voted me out, but let me be perfectly clear. This is not the end of my fight. This is the beginning. Kestrel Air, and every company that thinks dignity is optional will know that you cannot silence truth by silencing a leader. If they wanted to bury me, they've only planted me deeper, and from that soil, justice will grow. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some jeering, all captivated. That night, at home, Marcus hugged her fiercely. You didn't lose. Mom, you lit a fire, Elaine added, her voice soft but certain. Sometimes being cast out of one room makes you free to open the door to another, bigger, louder. Nadia smiled, exhaustion etched in her features but resolve burning brighter than ever. The board thought they had ended her influence. But she knew the truth. This was her breaking point. Yes, but it was also her turning point. The storm hadn't passed. It had only shifted, and she was ready to step into it, unbound by titles, untethered by walls. In the days following her removal, Nadia felt the peculiar quiet of someone suddenly cut free from an identity that had defined her for years. For the first time since she'd built North Star, she had no meetings, no reports, no boardroom to command. The silence pressed on her, but it also gave her space she hadn't expected. Elaine noticed it first. One morning over breakfast, she asked gently, "How are you feeling without that office?" Baby Nadia sipped her coffee, staring out the window at the passing cars. Lighter, strangely. They thought they were stripping me of power, but they freed me from their chains. My voice feels clearer now. Marcus, still chewing his toast, looked up. "Then use it, Mom. You don't need North Star's title to fight. People already listen to you." His words planted a seed, and that afternoon, Nadia met Renee Calder at a quiet cafe downtown. Renee had been scribbling notes furiously, already planning her next story. "Your ousting shocked people," Renee said, eyes sharp. "Some saw it as betrayal. Others saw it as proof you're too dangerous for corporations to contain. But here's the thing. Your story isn't ending. It's shifting. The question is, where will you go with it?" Nadia leaned back, considering, if North Star won't lead this fight, then maybe it's time to build something new, an independent coalition, a voice too broad for any one board to silence. Renee's smile widened. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. I've been fielding calls from advocacy groups, lawyers, even sympathetic senators. They all want to know what your next step is." The next step revealed itself faster than she expected. Daniel Holt reached out through encrypted channels. His message urgent. "The internal audit files are real. I can get them to you, but we must meet in person. Too risky online." They arranged the meeting in a dimly lit library basement in D.C. long after closing hours. Nadia arrived with Aaron by her side, though technically she was no longer his boss. Daniel looked more haggard than his viral videos, dark circles under his eyes, hands trembling slightly as he passed a flash drive across the table. "This is everything," he whispered. Kestrel commissioned 3 internal studies on bias in boarding practices. All 3 confirmed racial disparities. Instead of fixing the problem, executives buried the results. They trained staff to cover with coded language optics. Premium assurance. I kept copies, just in case. Nadia gripped the drive tightly. "You understand what this means? With these, we don't just have anecdotes. We have proof of systemic discrimination." Daniel nodded, his voice breaking. "I just want people to know the truth. I can't live with it buried anymore." Aaron's jaw tightened. "We'll get this out. But Daniel, you need protection. Once Kestrel realizes what you've handed over, you'll have a target on your back." Daniel gave a hollow laugh. "I already do." Back at her hotel, Nadia plugged in the drive. She scrolled through pages of graphs, percentages, and executive memos. The data was unambiguous. Black passengers flagged for secondary verification 3 times more often than white passengers, even with identical documentation. Notes in margins scribbled by managers spoke of maintaining a certain look in first-class lounges. Her stomach turned. The humiliation at Gate B-22 wasn't a fluke. It was policy in all but name. The next morning, Renee published the story with Nadia's blessing. Buried reports reveal Kestrel's systemic discrimination. The article went live at dawn, and by noon it had already spread across every platform. Cable news hosts waved printed copies in front of cameras. Protesters held up signs with graphs blown up to billboard size. Gerard Vance erupted in fury. In an emergency meeting with Curtis Greer, he slammed the table. "How the hell did she get those files? This could sink us." Curtis looked pale. "It's not just about her. The files are out. They're everywhere. We can't put the genie back in the bottle." For the first time, Gerard's polished facade cracked. Then we go scorched earth. We attack her credibility, her motives, even her family if we must. If she wants war, we'll give her war. Back in Newark. Nadia sat at the dining table with Elaine and Marcus as they watched the coverage. Protesters outside Kestrel's headquarters clashed with police. Lawsuits multiplied. Civil rights leaders invoked her name in speeches. Marcus turned to his mother, eyes wide. "You did it. You exposed them." Nadia shook her head softly. "No. Daniel did. The others who risked everything to bring the truth forward, they're the real heroes. I just gave them a microphone." Elaine reached for her daughter's hand. "And sometimes, baby, that's the difference between truth buried and truth heard." But victory was complicated. The smear campaign Gerard promised began within days. Anonymous sources claimed Nadia had doctored the files. Pundits speculated that she'd orchestrated the entire confrontation at Gate B-22 for personal gain. An op-ed sneered, "Is Nadia Brooks America's new corporate villain?" The pressure mounted again. But this time, Nadia didn't face it as an isolated executive under siege. She stood as the face of a movement growing beyond her. Advocacy groups launched the Dignity Coalition. With Nadia as honorary chair, college students rallied in solidarity, churches held vigils. Hashtags like "Your Dignity for All" trended daily. One evening, standing on her porch, Nadia watched neighbors she barely knew drop off casseroles, flowers, and handwritten notes. One note, scrawled in messy handwriting, read, "My mom was told she didn't belong in first class either. Thank you for fighting." Tears blurred her vision. The cost remained high, but for the first time she felt the turn of the tide. Later that night, Marcus asked, "Mom, do you think this is the end of Kestrel?" She looked at him, steady. "No, corporations rarely collapse overnight. But it might be the end of the world they thought they could keep hidden, and that's enough to change everything." The turn had come. Nadia had lost her title, her company, her old life, but she had gained something greater, a movement too vast to silence. Winter settled over Washington with a sharpness that made every breath feel like glass. On the Capitol steps, a crowd gathered under gray skies, their scarves and banners whipping in the wind. They weren't there for a parade or a celebration. They were there for the final hearing that would decide the fate of Kestrel Air. Inside, the chamber buzzed with tension. Senators shuffled papers, journalists adjusted recorders, and cameras pointed like unblinking eyes. Nadia sat at the front, her posture steady, her presence calm but commanding. To her right, Daniel Holt looked pale but resolute. Aaron sat just behind them, loyal even without the weight of a title. Elaine and Marcus watched from the gallery, their faces a mix of pride and worry. The chairman of the committee banged the gavel. We are here to address systemic discrimination in airline practices. The evidence provided by whistleblowers and advocates has brought us to this moment. Today, accountability begins. Gerard Vance took the stand first. His suit was immaculate, his voice controlled. He leaned into the microphone with calculated gravitas. Ladies and gentlemen, Kestrel Air is not perfect, but it is not guilty of the caricature painted by Ms. Brooks and her allies. We face daily threats to aviation security, and policies must reflect vigilance. To call that racism is not only false, it's dangerous. He continued with slides and jargon, weaving a narrative of necessity and patriotism. Some senators nodded, but others frowned when the questioning began. Gerard's confidence cracked. One senator raised a copy of the leaked audit. "Mr. Vance, can you explain why your own internal studies flagged racial disparities 3 times higher for black passengers in first-class boarding, and why those reports were buried?" Gerard's face tightened. "Those studies were preliminary, inconclusive. Answer the question," the senator pressed. Gerard stammered, then defaulted to denial, but the numbers glared back at him from the screens. The cracks in his armor widened. Then it was Nadia's turn. She rose and approached the microphone, her voice quiet but carrying. "On a cold afternoon, at gate B-22, I was told my 14,800 ticket wasn't enough to prove I belonged. I was handcuffed in front of my son. At first, I thought it was one woman's bias, one humiliating mistake. But these files show it wasn't. It was policy dressed as discretion, and that policy humiliated thousands of passengers who had no cameras, no platform, no leverage." She paused, letting the silence fill. "I lost my company for standing up. My family was threatened. My mother was hospitalized from stress. My son was forced to grow up faster than he should have. But I would endure it again if it meant this truth could no longer be buried." The audience erupted in applause, gavel pounding for order. A young senator leaned forward. "Ms. Brooks, what do you believe justice looks like now?" Nadia's gaze swept the chamber. Justice is more than fines or apologies. Justice means structural reform, mandatory bias training, transparent audits, passenger rights codified into law. Justice means every child of color can walk onto a plane, sit in their seat, and know they belong without question. Justice means dignity becomes policy, not an afterthought. Her words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward. By the end of the session, the verdict was clear. Kestrel would face massive federal penalties, leadership changes, and binding reforms. Gerard Vance resigned before the final gavel fell. The airline's stock plummeted, but civil rights groups celebrated a victory long overdue. That evening, Nadia stepped outside into the cold air, greeted by cheers from the crowd. Marcus pushed through to hug her tightly. "You did it, Mom. You actually did it." Elaine wrapped them both in her arms, whispering, "I always knew you would." Reporters pressed forward, shouting questions, but Nadia raised her hand and spoke directly to the cameras. "This isn't about one woman or one airline. This is about all of us. Every traveler who has been told they don't belong, every family humiliated in silence. Today, we prove that dignity cannot be denied, and tomorrow we keep building a world where it never will be again." The clip aired on every major network. Within hours, it was shared millions of times. The image of Nadia, standing with her son and mother at her side, became the symbol of a movement. In the weeks that followed, The Passenger Dignity Act was drafted in Congress, drawing bipartisan support. Airlines across the country scrambled to review their policies before being forced. Civil rights leaders hailed Nadia as a pivotal figure in a new chapter of accountability. But in the quiet of her own home, Nadia found the most profound moment not on television or in headlines, but at the dinner table. Marcus leaned across, his voice steady. "Mom, for the first time in my life, when I walk into a room, I don't feel like I don't belong. I feel like I'm carrying part of your fight, and that makes me proud." Nadia's eyes filled, her hand trembling as she reached for his. "That's all I ever wanted for you." Elaine smiled softly, the lines of worry easing for the first time in months. Then maybe the storm was worth it. Nadia looked around the table, her son, her mother, her chosen family of allies, and felt a peace she hadn't known since before Gate B-12. The fight wasn't over. It never would be. But the turn had come, and the resolution was real. Her power no longer came from a title or a boardroom. It came from the truth, from the movement that had risen around her, from the resilience that refused to bend. And as she closed her eyes that night, she whispered the words that had carried her through every battle. Purpose, not punishment. This time, it didn't feel like a reminder. It felt like a promise kept. Spring arrived with soft rain and trees blooming along the streets of Newark. For the first time in months, the air around the Brooks household felt lighter. Yet, the echoes of what had happened at Gate B-12 remained, woven into their daily lives in ways that Nadia could never fully shake. One morning, Marcus stood at the doorway with his backpack slung over one shoulder. He hesitated, then said, "Mom, they asked me to give a talk at school. About you, about what happened. I don't know if I should." Nadia looked up from her coffee, studying him. He was taller now, his voice deeper, but the uncertainty in his eyes reminded her of the boy who once asked why strangers looked at him differently. "You don't have to carry my story if it feels heavy," she said gently. Marcus shook his head. "It doesn't feel heavy. It feels big, like if I tell it right, maybe someone else will understand what it's like. Maybe they won't laugh when another kid says they were treated differently." Nadia's heart swelled with both pride and sorrow. "Then tell it in your own words, not mine, not theirs, yours, at school." Marcus spoke with a calmness that mirrored his mother's. He described the night at JFK, not with anger, but with honesty. When he finished, the auditorium sat silent for a long beat before applause filled the room. For the first time, he felt not like the boy who had been embarrassed in front of his peers, but like the son of a woman whose courage had reshaped an industry. Meanwhile, Nadia's days filled with invitations, speaking engagements, interviews, offers to write a book. She declined most of them, wary of becoming a brand instead of a voice. But one invitation she accepted a keynote at a civil rights conference in Atlanta, the birthplace of many movements before hers. Standing on the stage, she looked out at thousands of faces, students, elders, activists, ordinary citizens. She spoke not of her humiliation, not even of her victory, but of what came after. "Legacy," she said, her voice steady, "is not built in hearings or headlines. Legacy is built in the choices we make after the cameras are gone. It's in the policies rewritten, the children who walk through gates without fear, the mothers who no longer have to explain to their sons why they were singled out. Legacy is what remains when we choose purpose over punishment." time and time again. The crowd rose to their feet, the applause thunderous, but it was the quiet nods, the tears in the eyes of women who had lived through decades of indignity that meant the most to her. Back home, Elaine's health improved slowly. She returned to her church choir, her voice softer than before but carrying the same conviction. Sometimes, when Nadia sat in the pews, listening to her mother sing, she felt the years peel back, reminding her of where her strength had been rooted all along. Aaron, though no longer her COO, remained close. Over late-night calls, they discussed the future. He spoke of launching a new venture, one that would combine technology and ethics from the ground up. This time, he said, we build it not just to run airports, but to reimagine fairness in every system. Nadia listened, intrigued but cautious. Titles don't matter to me anymore, but if we can make something that ensures no one is humiliated the way I was, then maybe it's worth it. Renee Calder's book was published that summer, chronicling the rise and fall of Kestrel, the hearings, and Nadia's role. The final chapter bore a title Nadia hadn't expected, The Gate That Changed Everything. When she read the manuscript, tears fell onto the pages. It wasn't her story alone anymore. It belonged to every person who had stood up, spoken out, and refused to bow. Gerard Vance, disgraced and sidelined, faded from public view. Occasionally, his name surfaced in articles about corporate downfall, but his era had ended. Kestrel Air staggered on under new leadership, bound by reforms it once resisted. The plaque at JFK's gate, B-22 installed after a settlement, bore an inscription chosen by a coalition of activists, every seat earned, every passenger equal. One evening, as Nadia and Marcus walked past that very gate on their way to a flight, he stopped to read the words aloud. Every passenger equal. He looked at her, his voice quiet. That's because of you. Nadia shook her head. That's because of us. Because people spoke, because they refused to stay silent, on the flight home, as Marcus dozed beside her and Elaine rested with a blanket across her lap. Nadia gazed out at the clouds, for the first time since the ordeal began. She didn't feel like she was bracing against a storm. She felt like she was soaring above it, unbound. Her mind wandered to the future, what Marcus's world would look like, what legacy she was leaving. She didn't want him to remember her as a CEO or even as a fighter. She wanted him to remember her as someone who chose dignity, again and again, no matter the cost. In her journal that night, she wrote, "The measure of justice is not in what we tear down, but in what we build after. The world will not remember my titles, but maybe, just maybe, it will remember that I refused to sit down when told I didn't belong, and maybe that will be enough to keep the next generation standing tall." The storm had taken her company, her sense of safety, even her health at moments, but it had given her something larger: clarity, community, and a voice amplified beyond anything she could have imagined. That was her legacy. And as dawn broke over the Newark skyline, painting the sky in hues of gold, Nadia Brooks closed her journal, poured herself a cup of coffee, and whispered once more the words that had carried her from humiliation to history. Purpose, not punishment. This time, the words didn't sound like armor. They sounded like home. This story reminds us that dignity is never a luxury, it is a birthright. Nadia Brooks's struggle shows that injustice doesn't always come as loud attacks. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a denial, a hesitation, a look that says you do not belong. For many who have lived long lives, you know this feeling. You may remember the jobs you were overlooked for, the doors quietly closed, the words never spoken but always implied. The lesson here is not only about fighting large corporations or winning public battles. It is about the choices we make in small, private moments. Do we remain silent when dignity is denied? Or do we speak even when our voices shake? Her story tells us that courage may cost comfort, but silence costs the soul. And when one person refuses to bow, they can light a path for many others to walk with head held high. For all of us, whether in our workplaces, communities, or families, the call is the same. Let us leave behind a legacy of respect, so the next generation never doubts that they belong. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful story. If it touched your heart, if it made you think, or if it reminded you of your own journey, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep these stories alive and keep building a world where dignity is never denied.